This country been run by a brother goats, the greediest of all time. They have all of self and none of the mentality. The chorus is bunch of pigs and goats running this desk day. And the latest deception and betrayal is really cause for alarm. They're the greediest of all time. It is plain to see the true gang and give a damn about you and me. Even big supporters crying foul and shame at how these comrades dirty in the Labour Party name. Don't business about that as long as they pocket fat. Too bad you don't agree. The goat them say it's all about me. That's the chorus. Who is the nanny gate liar? Who don't spin doctor? Men, whose sole agenda is to make themselves richer and the poor harder. They say I know that I greedy, but I beg you don't watch me stop being hateful. Instead just be grateful. All the good them say it's all about me. That's the slogan. The big salary increase is just the latest injustice to be imposed on the people by these blundering misfits. They're selfish and greedy with no love for the needy. Malicious and run race, make the thing ain't got no taste. Disrespectful and pompous, arrogant and self-righteous. These goats too brave and bold, ain't got no heart, no soul. They fed on their own nest, we not a care for the rest. They say it's all about me. That's the goat, them mantra. Who want the whole hog treating poor people like dog, who keep flying high and start living our sons here to die, who take the pepper, the pop and the laugh, the peace, enough talking about lift and elevate, just words and promises but no relief. Who lacking empathy, compassion, humility, who think that shame laboring him is a sustainable strategy? Here they got them but woe be unto these ghosts and vampires. Fake Ecclesiastes 5 verse 10 says, whoever loves money never has enough. Whoever loves wealth is never satisfied with their income. Firstly, not grievous evil under the sun. Wealth brought it to the harm of its owners, lost to misfortune, so that their children have nothing to inherit. So let them carry on, God don't like ugly. Who playing, who fooling, who since June 2022, who do the big bet and switch, divide the poor and the rich, who raking in bigly while so many going hungry, who are disgrace of the eye clothes sucking parasite, a bunch of termites, it wrote them, We love to serve our country that God has blessed so well. In peace and love and happiness, we will forever dwell. We ask for God's protection and guidance on our way. The People's Action Movement will strive from day to day. The People's Action Movement is here and here to stay.
When we hear about the IMF, known as the International Monetary Fund, and in particular when we hear of the International Monetary Fund or IMF in St. Kitts and Nevis, it conjures up emotion of fear, anxiety, and maybe even depression. You may ask why? Well, let's go back to 2011. When, as far as the records show, in postmodern St. Kitts and Nevis, it was the first time that most of us heard about the IMF, when the government of the day sought the assistance of the IMF in getting a loan of significant sums. It was then that we heard expressions like structural reform, structural adjustment, haircuts, and all of those phrases which, if you did not study economics, you would not have otherwise been familiar with what they meant. But that reality brought us home very clearly to what it meant to be under the watch, if you will, of the IMF. On this edition of Perspectives, we are going to do a deep dive, if you will, on what the recent report said on the findings of the IMF, who recently visited St. Kitts. Why were they here? Should we be concerned? Is something looming on the horizon? And the expert that is sitting in the room with me tonight, who would clarify some of our concerns and some of our questions on the IMF, is of course one of our very own, the Honorable Dr. Sean Kenneth Richards. And just for context, let me say that Dr. Richards has been the Deputy Prime Minister of St. Kitts and Nevis from 2015 to 2022. He has otherwise been in politics for a number of years. I don't want to get the years wrong, so I'm not going to mention them now. And I just want to say this because his training also makes him a sort of authority on this subject matter. And I often say, this is my personal opinion, that in the debate of the budget in St. Kitts and Nevis, again, my opinion, I find Dr. Richards to be one of the better budget debaters in St. Kitts and Nevis. And so tonight, I want us to join in the conversation. I consider tonight one of education, because a lot of us would be learning things that hitherto we may not have known. And so pull out your notebooks and get ready for this conversation. Also help me welcome to Perspectives on this, the 4th edition of the 2nd season, our very own Dr. Sean Richards.
Thank you, Laverne, for having me on Perspectives this evening. I have been a member of Parliament since 2004, so for approximately 20, going on to 21 years later this year. Therefore, you don't have to get it incorrect. I'm right here to provide you with that information. It is my pleasure, of course, to be here once more and to share with the audience the discussion that we're having this evening in terms of the St. Kitts and Nevis IMF 2025 Article 4 mission, which was published in February of this year. So we're speaking just a few weeks ago that this publication took place, in which the IMF presented its preliminary findings on the economy of St. Kitts and Nevis. To also provide some background to persons, I would have worked for a number of years in the St. Kitts and Nevis Audit Office, and I also have a background in accounting.
Thank you for that context, because some people like to ask, well, who qualify he or she to speak on these matters? And I certainly, with only 1 semester of economics in university, certainly am not qualified to talk on this. So I'm really appreciative, and so are all of us, that you can come here tonight, Dr. Richards, and share some information. So let me set the stage by reading a summary of the findings of the IMF 2025 Article 4 report on St. Kitts and Nevis, the highlights of which says that the St. Kitts and Nevis is on a path of economic recovery, driven by tourism and construction. But it notes risks from global uncertainties and climate change. The government's fiscal prudence has reduced debt, but diversification and structural reforms are needed to sustain growth. Key recommendations include strengthening public finances, enhancing resilience to external shocks, and fostering private sector investment. The IMF also stresses the importance of improving financial regulation and adapting to climate risks. So in a nutshell, that was the summary of the findings that were written in Article 4 of the most recent report of the IMF visit to St. Kitts. But let's just, before we get into the real crux of the subject matter, Dr. Richards, talk about what, in the first instance, would have brought the IMF to St. Kitts. Because like I said, we did not know about the IMF prior to 2011. And for us, since then, it's a little bit of it creates a little bit of an inertia to a lot of us who don't know what these things mean. So why would they have been here over the course of the last few weeks, I would imagine, that ended up with the Article 4 report on St. Kitts and Nevis?
Thanks for that question, Navon. Let me first indicate that St. Kitts and Nevis is a member of the IMF. For those who may not know, IMF stands for the International Monetary Fund. As you rightly pointed out, we first began hearing about the IMF back in about 2011. At that particular point in time, the country found itself at a crucial crossroad in terms of the finances of the country. St. Kitts and Nevis, in terms of its indebtedness, for example, had just about the highest indebtedness in the world, where we found that in terms of our debt to GDP ratio, it had exceeded, I think, 100%. It could have been actually in the region of maybe closer to 200%. So that means that in terms of the debt, we had a staggering debt amount at that particular point in time. That debt, of course, was stifling the ability of the government to carry out certain services and to provide certain basic goods to the people of the Federation of St. Kitts and Nevis. For example, one of the things which would have happened back then is that the government would have put a freeze in terms of giving civil servants what is referred to as their yearly or annual increments. You had a situation whereby private entities in particular, which had invested or lent monies to the government, had to receive a haircut. In other words, let's say you lent $20 million to the government. The government came up with a plan whereby you only received $10 million of the $20 million that you would have invested. So companies lost a significant amount of money that they had invested in the government. Persons within schools, for example, would have complained about getting basic necessities needed for the schools, such as toilet papers. So it basically crowded out the government ability to do a number of things, because if you have a high debt, it means that your income is going to be spent servicing the debt that you have. Let's break it down to a typical household. Let's say you're I, Lavon. We make $2,000 per month. We go to the bank and we borrow $500 in terms of what we are going to be paying back on a monthly basis. Of course, it is manageable, but the more money you borrow, then it means that the more money you have to pay back to the bank at the end of the month. So if you borrow actually beyond what your revenue is, then it means that you're basically using most of your income to repay the loan that you would have taken from the bank. If you're using the majority of your income to repay a loan, it means then that in terms of your ability, let's say, to buy food, your ability to pay your rent, your ability to take your children to the doctor, your ability to even go out on a particular evening and have a little fun, those things, of course, would have to be curtailed. And so the government found itself in a similar situation back then. One of the things which was done in order to bring down the debt was that we ended up having to swap the lands, public lands, lands which belongs to the government, to a national bank in particular, that where most of the debt that the government had. So the land, you had a land for debt swap, whereby the government would have given land to national bank in exchange for with what I basically would refer to as debt forgiveness. So that is what happened. If we are not careful, we may very well be on that same path again, because if you look at the IMF report, the Article 4 consultation, it says that by the year 2030, it is expected that the debt is going to increase to approximately, I think it is 68%
yes.
of GDP. Currently, the debt is hovering somewhere around 61% of GDP. Ideally, in terms of any particular country, the debt to GDP ratio should be less than 60%. Again, for the very same reasons that I outlined, because you must be able to have a portion of your revenue to be able to spend on basic services, whether it is to provide toilet paper for the schools, whether it is to be able to provide fuel for the police vehicles, whether it is to be able to provide medication
at the
hospitals, to fix roads. These are some of the essential services that persons depend upon from a government. And so the more that you have to pay, whether on a monthly or yearly basis, in terms of repaying monies that you borrowed in terms of debt, the less monies you will have to be able to afford these basic services that the government is expected to provide persons with. The other part of it is that, of course, one can look at, and I'm certain that we will get to that aspect of it, because again, we saw this has been one of the effects back then. In order to increase its revenues, what the government back then did, and interestingly, it was a Labour government back then, and it is now a Labour government again, because the Labour administrations tend to show that they are not able to properly manage the economic affairs of St. Kitts and Nevis. So back then, what would have happened is you saw the introduction of VAT, the value added tax, at 17%, which at the time was the highest within the region. That again, I stress, is because of the level of debt that we had back then. We saw astronomical increases in terms of water rates, which had went up by some 600%. Electricity rates went up. And a number of other different measures were introduced by the government back then in order, one, to curtail expenditure and to increase revenue.
Right. Well, thank you for that concise explanation and putting it into context of what happened in 2011 and how it affected, government's ability to properly look after the people, and the people who put it there. So one of the things I didn't say, though, Dr. Richards, is that while you were part of the unity government, the coalition of parties that formed a united front then, was that that unity arrangement helped to pay off the debt prior, wasn't it before the actual date was due? And I think that is worthy of mentioning, because kudos to you and the team then, the fiscal prudence and the fiscal credibility that you brought was able to do that way in advance of the date that we were expected to. So I just want you to mention that for the records.
Indeed, you are correct. When the Team Unity administration, in which I served as Deputy Prime Minister, came into office, we were able to bring the debt down to within the 60% range, and the records would show that we were well on our way to bringing the debt to a very sustainable level. As a matter of fact, we were actually ahead of the estimated time period that it had been estimated for which the debt would go down, decline to below the 60% level. Apart from that though, one of the things that the Team Unity administration was also able to do, because of the very same fiscal prudence that you mentioned, is to buy back a significant portion of the land that had been swapped with National Bank. That in a sense meant that persons, locals, were now able to get more land, whether it is for housing purposes, whether it is for businesses, etc., in terms of ensuring that civil servants were able to receive the increments that would have happened on a yearly basis. One of the things which persons became quite concerned about during the course of last year was the fact that the Team Unity administration had been able to pay double salaries for quite a number of years whilst in government. Now, on the flip side of that is the IMF report has indicated that we're basically not on the right path at this particular point in time, and a little later I will make some statements with regards to giving increases to whether it is the civil servants, increasing a minimum wage, and some of the effects of doing those things, especially without ensuring that there is some sort of performance measure in place, so that persons do not necessarily receive increases, and in terms of there being some sort of meritorious practice for doing so, some sort of standard that you don't have those particular standards in place. I don't want to go ahead of you and your questions, but hopefully we will get to that aspect of it.
Even if you can, and I need to dial back, I certainly will. But we're going well so far, because we only have an hour on this show, but really the report is a comprehensive one. And the purpose of this discussion is to break it down to the layman level. Oftentimes, as I said in the introduction, and especially because of the experience that we had 2011 and post 2011, there is an automatic fear when the mention of the International Monetary Fund is raised to the average Joe and Jane. And so maybe there's nothing to be feared, and sometimes what takes away the fear is education. So we are going well, and I admonish that it's okay, you can take your time, and I'll follow the discussion. But one of the things that struck me in the report was the heading on the tax reforms. And there were a couple of recommendations. I'm going to list them briefly, and maybe you could weigh in on where you think these recommendations could go, given the current trajectory of the government, and perhaps the impact that it would have on those who are likely to be affected. So, for instance, there was a broad recommendation about harmonizing the VAT. There was another one that spoke to increasing the excise rates on alcoholic beverages, tobacco, and fossil fuels. Now, well, I don't drink and I don't smoke, but what caught my attention is fossil fuels, because that, for me, would trigger thoughts that, well, would electricity bill rate, would electricity rate, increase? And then there's another one on updating property tax assessments. Well, I don't know if updating property tax assessments also means increasing the property tax. And then there's another one that says investment and rental income could be taxed to improve equity. And the final one said, recommended the phasing out of pandemic era tax breaks So I don't know if you want to either jump on all or jump on one or jump on the one that you think is, I don't know. You take it away.
It is really difficult to go to delve into the fullness of some of these particular recommendations that we see coming from the IMF within an hour, but I will try my best to do so. Again, to put things in context, the IMF is saying that over the next 5 years, it is expected that the public debt is going to increase. The report also indicates that in terms of inflows, revenue coming from the CBI, while it appears as though there might be some stabilization at this particular point in time, it doesn't necessarily expect that there is going to be a significant increase in terms of the revenues incoming from the CBI. So I want persons to take those two things into perspective. I also want persons to bear in mind that this is a government which has been saying to persons that they intend to make life better for you. But in terms of what we're seeing coming from the IMF, it appears as though some serious tightening of the belt will happen if these recommendations are actually implemented. The first recommendation that you referred to is harmonization of VAT. When we speak about harmonization of whether it is VAT, harmonization of laws, we're basically saying that across every single thing, it is going to be the same. So everything is in harmony. So what is the IMF basically saying? And the interesting thing is that, of course, the IMF is quite diplomatic in terms of the choice of words, the choice of terms. So if you're going to harmonize a VAT currently is at 17%. So if you're speaking about harmonization, basically the IMF is saying that everything should be at the same rate. So if we're going to look at the 17% rate, you have some goods and services which attract a VAT of less than 17%. For example, if you look at hotel and restaurants, for example, the VAT that is charged is 10%, and then I think there's an additional 2% levy, but they pay 10%. Rental income, businesses that are renting, for example, and who pay a VAT, I think it's just about 10% also for those, and I stand corrected, but I know it's less than 17%. So is it that the IMF is saying, no, put everything at 17%? The other thing which I have wondered about is we don't pay VAT on food, medical supplies, funeral expenses, educational supplies. Is it that you're recommending that we now pay a VAT on those because those are zero rated?
Yes.
So if you're looking at harmonization, then that you pay the same VAT amount on every single thing. Now, if you're a business and you are renting a building and you're paying VAT and the VAT is going to increase, what is that business going to do? It is going to increase the cost of the goods and services that it supplies. And if it increases the cost of the goods and services which are supplied, it means, therefore, that additional cost will be passed on to the consumers. While it is that some may argue that, okay, in terms of if you increase it to 17% for hotel and restaurants, when you go out to eat, it means that you're going to pay more in terms of the VAT, so that is an additional cost to you. So if you're going to have that harmonization, then we, the regular consumers, we will pay the price because businesses will pass on that price. But apart from businesses, we go into, whether it is the supermarket, we go into businesses to transact business. When you go to a lawyer, for example, to get something done, and the lawyer charges your VAT on the fee, it means you're going to pay an additional amount in VAT to the lawyer in terms of the fees that the lawyer charges you. So whether it is the average woman who is going to the lawyer, whether it is for child support matters, or you're going to deal with a housing matter, you're going to get advice about anything, you have that additional amount that the IMF is saying that perhaps the government should charge 2 persons because of harmonization. You referred specifically to the excise tax on alcoholic beverages, tobacco, and I think the other one is fossil fuels.
Yes.
I made the point already in terms of you going out to eat. A lot of us, we go out to socialize during the course of the week, in particular on the weekend. So if you're going to increase the excise tax on alcoholic beverages, it means that in terms of what you go out and consume, whether it is in terms of alcohol, you're going to pay more for it. And it doesn't mean that because someone goes out and consume alcohol that that person is an alcoholic. Because you could go out and have a drink or two, but you're going to pay more for that drink or two. And so businesses will increase the price. But what you may very well see is that a number of these businesses may also close, or they may limit their hours of operation because of the fact that persons have less money to spend and can hardly afford to buy the drinks. As it is, we are grappling with the high inflation that we have been seeing, and with what is happening in the US right now. It is expected that because of the increase in tariffs that the US is levying on some countries, that we will see further inflation taking place.
The tailwinds will reach us eventually.
It will. You mentioned specifically electricity in terms of excise tax on fossil fuels. But I'm surprised that you didn't mention gasoline for vehicles.
The cooking gas.
The cooking gas.
Right.
The cooking gas.
Yes.
And the gasoline for vehicles.
Yes.
Just about every household, with the exception of those who may use electricity to power their appliances, their stoves, etc., you use gasoline, whether it is the small tank or the big tank. So if you're going to have an increase in the excise tax on fossil fuels, then it means that the cost of those will also increase, because businesses will pass those additional costs to the regular man and woman. And those are the persons, the vulnerable persons in particular, who will be affected the most. The senior citizens, those making minimum wage, they will be affected. They have children to feed. It means they will have less money to be able to feed their children. And you already get an idea as to the widening effect in terms of some of these proposals, because you're not just speaking about the gas. Bus fee just went up. And so if it is that gas is going to increase, you may very well have the bus drivers asking again for an increase, because the cost has increased, or the bus drivers that just got an increase, they too will be affected, because if they are not granted a next increase, it means that their margins are wiped away, and with a smaller margin, again, it means that they have less money to be able to do certain basic things. And I want to make the point that this is because primarily fiscal mismanagement. You got into government and you start spending money left, right, and center without taking into account the fact that with here in St. Kitts and Nevis, you basically don't have any natural resources. You depend on tourism. You depend on the CBI revenue. Those are very fickle industries. And the report speaks about, natural disasters.
Yes.
And so if you have a natural disaster, again, the revenue is going to be affected. The CBI revenues are down, and already you see the effects of that in terms of the financial position of the government. Updating property tax assessments. Just like you have wondered, what does that mean? If you're going to update property tax assessments, it means basically you're going out to get the current market value for the property. And upon getting the current market value, you're going to be assessed your property tax at that particular value. So again, for the regular man who out there paying a mortgage has finally been able to own a piece of the rock, again, you will be paying additional income. And so no matter how you slice it, basically, you will be affected if these recommendations are to go in place. The housing and social development levy could become more progressive. What are you saying in terms of that? Are you saying that in terms of persons who make more money should pay more in terms of the social housing and development levy? Are you saying to the minimum wage earners who do not pay the social housing and development levy that they too should also pay it? Because if you're saying it should become more progressive, it means that more and more people should be paying it, and that the more income you earn, the more you should pay in terms of the housing and social development levy. And we could get into an argument about that, because the persons who supposedly benefit from the housing and social development levy are not necessarily the ones depending on government for housing or even for these sort of social services, but you may be asked to pay more.
Yes.
Non-labor income such as investment and rental income. A lot of persons, when they build their homes, they build an apartment to enable them to be in a better position to pay the mortgage, to meet other cost expenses that they have. And so if you're now going to say, well, okay, we are going to tax rental income, the person has the Airbnb. It means the little income that you get from the Airbnb, they are suggesting that it be taxed. It means that if you have an apartment that you're renting, it is going to be taxed. It's again less money coming into your pocket. The temporary reduction in VAT for the first half of 2025 as well as other pandemic era breaks should be phased out. So, in other words, they're saying this reduction that you have for the first 6 months, they are not recommending that it becomes permanent, that it goes beyond the 6 months. After the 6 months, bring it to an end. That is what the IMF is recommending to the government of St. Kitts and Nevis and other pandemic era tax breaks. For example, you had some businesses, the unincorporated business tax, for example, they were receiving some breaks, and others who would have been receiving breaks, they're saying bring those to an end. And finally, it has the negotiated tax concession packages for corporate income, a tax which unfairly benefit profitable large international hospitality companies should be lapsed. What happens is that a number of businesses, when they decide to invest to come into St. Kitts and Nevis, they go to skip and they apply for tax concessions. The IMF is recommending that you bring those to an end. Now, we could look at it.
So then what would be the attraction?
Well, we could look at it from different points of view. That, as you ask, what is going to be the attraction to those businesses to come into St. Kitts? Now, an existing business may also argue that it's sort of unfair for them to come in and get these tax concessions, which I am not able to enjoy. But you're sort of now bringing me to one of the other points that I mentioned earlier, because the report also speaks to certain other reforms, and interestingly, it points out that in terms of St. Kitts and Nevis, you now have the highest minimum wage, which within the Eastern Caribbean Currency Union. It highlights that the government has given recent increases to civil servants. The report also recommends that in terms of increases to civil servants, that those be curtailed. Basically, stop. For however period of time, I don't know. But curtail the increases to civil servants. But the bigger point, one of the bigger points that I want to make is this. You have the highest minimum wage within the ECCU, and I think the second tranche in terms of the increase in minimum wage takes effect in June or July of this year. I don't know if you realize though that the report also says that in terms of productivity, that there is slow productivity growth within St. Kitts and Nevis and the lower contribution from human capital. Now, when we speak about slow productivity growth, it basically means that the output is less. The output is less. Basically, you're spending the same or more money, but in terms of the output that you're getting economically it is less. I want to bear that in mind because I want to go back to the point about the getting investors. How do you attract investors into the country? But it also says that there's a lower contribution from human capital, which means then that in terms of what you're getting, the output that you're getting from the human capital, the workers here in St. Kitts and Nevis, that you're getting a lower contribution. It means then that persons are not working to their full capacity, to their full potential. Now there's several different things that we can conclude or we can look at in terms of that. Let me go back to the investors. One, if you have the highest minimum wage within the ECCU, that already may discourage certain investors from coming to St. Kitts and Nevis because you have the highest minimum wage. Why not go someplace else where in terms of the wages they are lower? So that isn't an incentive in terms of coming to St. Kitts. And you can't say, well, okay, the wages are high, but productivity is high because the report has pointed out that productivity is low. You're getting a low contribution from human capital and you have slow productivity rate. So you can't say, well, okay, yes, I'm going to come to St. Kitts because even though the wages are high, I know in terms of productivity, productivity is high. So we have that. We have the fact that, okay, you have given these increases in minimum wage and also to civil servants in particular. And I remember a previous show I was on, we spoke about the Productivity Council, which the government went to Parliament to pass. We have heard nothing further of it. But you are giving increases to persons without any sort of merit-based system in place.
Maybe the Productivity Council will be activated after this.
Perhaps. But basically what you have happening is, if I know I can go to work, I'm going to get increments, I'm going to get increases, government is going to increase wages for just about everybody, but I don't have to produce, then of course I am going to go to work and I'm going to produce at the bare minimum because I'm getting rewarded for low productivity.
You are striking a chord with me now. And I remember in a conversation that I had with a young lady who, before she went into the civil service, used to work at one of the banks, not an indigenous bank. And she said that when she, lo and behold, she was already a young adult when she went into the civil service. And she got a request one day. And she knocked it out in a couple of hours. And her co-workers chided her and said, girl, this is not the private sector. We don't do these things so fast. She said she was never more shocked in her life.
And that is exactly what is happening.
Crazy.
And the report also speaks to the fact that if you're going to continue to give increases, especially without merit, you're going to have problems between the public and the private sector. Why would I want to go into the private sector when I could go into government, produce at a bare minimum, and get rewarded?
Yes, because at the end of the service, you get a pension.
And you get a pension. And you aren't even guaranteed in terms of some of the private sector companies that you will get a pension. And so you have a serious problem there.
Didn't the report say that the, well, and I don't want to misquote, that the in terms of the number of employees in government, was there not something about that?
It spoke, yes. It mentioned the fact that you have quite a large civil servant.
Yes.
And I laughed because on one hand you're speaking about a sustainable island state. And how do you build a sustainable island state with these particular factors at play? Because it means that you have to correct these. And when you have an economy whereby persons are not producing at their full potential, it is going to have negative impacts on the economy. Because you aren't getting the production out of persons that you need in order to grow your economy.
But Dr. Richards, even to examine why that might be so, is it that people, well, we like to say colloquially, they're square pegs in round hole?
That is also
Could that be a factor? I mean, it is pellucid that in these small islands, if you don't wave the flag of the political party in office, you are marginalized for at least 5 years.
You are, and you can't build a sustainable island
with half of your human capital.
With half of your human capital, you're correct, Lavon. You have to include everybody, but you have to ensure that in terms of production, you are getting that production. Of course, the IMF gave a recipe in terms of some of the things which would be needed in order to deal with the productivity aspect of it.
Including upskilling.
Including upskilling. And I recall when I was Minister of Education, we basically started that process in terms of AVEC, amalgamating AVEC, youth skills. We brought on board the vocational training, TVET, the TVET program within the schools, because we recognize that you need to start now to upskill persons. And so the report speaks to that. It says, for example, that some of these investors, some of these big establishments, when they come in, can't find the local persons with the necessary training, with the necessary expertise that you need. When you hear the government speaking, you don't hear about these things.
No.
A building this, a building that, a building this, a building that, and some of these buildings, up until now, you can't see them. But some of the basic foundational issues that we need to pay attention to, we are not addressing those issues.
They're not the party that put people first, Sean. We are.
I agree with you. And that is why, for example, the report says that back in the 1980s, we had growth of 6% and upwards.
I saw that.
And now the growth that we're seeing
is around 2%.
Around 2.5%. And who was in government back in the 1980s?
The People's
Action Movement. Of course, a government of the People's Action Movement. And so you had that particular growth. I was looking at a particular publication by the World Bank, and it speaks of how low human capital can limit productivity improvements. And it uses examples from Turkey and Peru. It points out by improving the education, skills, and abilities of workers, these countries can potentially improve the productivity of their workers and their economies. And it says productive workers must not only have good fundamental skills acquired in the formal educational phase, they should also have high-level functional skills related to work to be most productive. And the last thing that I would read from it is, it says half of the employers cite the lack of competent, qualified personnel with relevant cognitive and technical skills as limited factors for the ability to hire workers and to be more productive. Social emotional skills such as work ethic, teamwork, persistence, adaptability, initiative are also critical skills not easily found in many aspiring workers, and therefore technical training programs, whether in the classroom, virtual or at work, play a fundamental role in retraining workers to remain relevant to changing demands and to be productive. Now, some persons may ask, well, what that has to do with me in terms of how does it affect me? How does it affect the economy of St. Kitts and Nevis? If you have slow productivity, it means then that in terms of the economy being able to grow, in terms of the revenue base being able to grow, you're going to have a decrease, a slowdown in terms of the growth of the economy. If the economy goes into, whether it is a recession or growth slows down, it means that in terms of revenue coming into the government is going to get less revenue. Investors aren't going to be attracted to a country where there is productivity levels across the board are low. I prefer to go elsewhere, pay money elsewhere, because I know I am going to be getting a value in terms of my investment.
Yes.
And so if investors don't come here, you have more and more persons graduating from school. Where are they going to find jobs? So the report is really a scathing one, and it is one that we should be seriously concerned about in terms of where our country is heading. Based on what the IMF is saying, the debt is increasing. The IMF is recommending that basically across the board, and when you look at it across the board, every single body is going to be affected.
Yes.
You know, interestingly, Fiscal is moving towards these smart meters, and so whether you want postpaid or prepaid, the consumers will have that particular option. But when you also look at it in the context of the IMF report and the suggestion that you should increase excise tax on fossil fuel, I wonder about the question that you ask. Are we expecting, we already saw in terms of businesses, an increase in terms of them now being charged a fuel surcharge. And so you wonder if that is where Fiscal is now heading towards, in terms of also placing that fuel surcharge on
the consumers.
Because if you're now moving towards those smart meters, maybe it is a way to say to persons that if the rates increase, you determine how much you use and how much it is that you pay for. So it's really a disaster in terms of what is happening, and I don't see the answers coming from the government. The IMF came in, yes, the IMF would have certain exports available to it, but the information that the IMF would have used is information which came from the government. So the government is aware as to many of these things. The government knows that the debt is increasing. The government knows that in terms of the current deficit, that is also increasing. You have less money available to spend, or you're basically spending more than you are actually getting in. And so we're really in for a very hard, difficult time here in the Federation of St. Kitts and Nevis. The fortunate part of it is that an election is due in 2027. And so as a people, as a country, we don't have to continue with these novices that we have in government who are definitely out of their league. It was just yesterday someone was saying to me that they don't see the people of St. Kitts and Nevis again voting for persons without any sort of experience. The person said young person, and it's really unfortunate that to me you're going to say that you don't see people voting for young persons again, because I personally believe that young persons do have a lot of potential, and they have a role to play in terms of the development of St. Kitts and Nevis. So I don't think it's necessarily about young persons. What I think is that we have an incompetent set of persons in government who continue to demonstrate that they know nothing about how to run a country.
They run the country by trial and error.
By trial and error. They haven't taken the time out to sit down and to learn. And even some of the old advisors have been saying the very same thing. They are not listening to anyone. They do not want to learn from anyone. I would go so far as to say that persons are saying that the most senior amongst them, Dr. Douglas has said it to persons. They ain't listening to him. They don't want any advice from him.
But look at the repercussions for the whole country.
And so the whole country, as you have alluded to, is now paying the price for it. You know what I mean? When Christmas comes and you get a little increase, you think things are good. But what we are looking at doesn't look good.
We're staring on the barrel of a gun, literally.
And we haven't mentioned the fact that Social Security is looking at reform.
Yes.
And so it also means that in terms of what Social Security takes from your income, you're looking at an increase amount coming out of your income from Social Security. So you already will be faced with a decreased amount of income after Social Security is taken out. And then you have the IMF making these particular recommendations to the government. Increase this, increase that. You don't say anything in here about decrease, you know. Persons on the social programs, they're saying the social programs still need to become more targeted.
Yes.
So it means...
But PAM has been saying that. There must be a means test.
There must be a means
you
test. You
can't have everybody getting the same benefits. But Dr. Richards, even looking at that wallet stuff, that wallet booster. Now, a gentleman said to me, Miss Keynes, I think this is the more... And this is an unschooled gentleman. I mean no disrespect to him, but he didn't go to any university. And he said, the problem I have with that, he said, can you imagine? He said, let's say a nurse is married to somebody who is a senior manager in the private sector. And the nurse maybe is averaging the same $5,000. But her husband, who's a senior manager in TDC, is probably taking home $11,000, $12,000, $13,000. So the combined income is 18. He said, why would you not look at the combined income of the particular household, right? And look to maybe a lower tier, a lower income bracket, so that group could have been the beneficiary. Because I mean, obviously, if you're a husband and a wife household, your combined income is what is going to run the household, pay the mortgage, pay the utility. And so why would you want to take it? And not only that, but for me,
I think you need to be more specific with the point, because some persons may miss the point that you're making. The husband is in the private sector making $11,000 a month.
Yes.
The wife is a nurse making $4,000 a month. A combined household income of $15,000. But the wife, because she's making $4,000, can get the $250 every single month. I think you need to specifically
well, you've said it. You've said it.
Yes.
You've said it for me.
Because persons may miss that particular point.
Yes.
And on the other hand now, take the point that you have the nurse now not making $4,000, but the nurse making $5,500. She is a single family unit. She has 4 children in school. She's not going to get the $250. She can get it, but she has crazy. 4 children in school that she has to fend for. But on the other hand, you could be in a household making $20,000 and I have 2 children. 2 children making, let's say, $2,000, and next one making $1,500. They don't have any bills to pay because I take care of all of the bills.
But that household still getting the...
But that household, still each child will still get that $250.
But clearly the government doesn't properly think of these things. But what Dr. Richards, for me, my takeaway from that is one that is saying, if these are your middle income earners, right, who you have to help out, but what is that saying about the state of affairs?
The state of the economy.
Thank you very much.
But the other part of it is because it's not properly thought out, and persons benefiting from it who may not necessarily need it. This is an additional cost on the government. And so it adds up. And when it adds up, somebody has to pay the cost of it at the end of the day. And that is why you now find, in terms of indebtedness, etc., the government debt level is increasing. That is why the current account deficit has widened. And that is why the IMF is now making these particular recommendations, because of the waste within the government. But
this government think that they could solve unemployment with social programs. Put people to work. I tell people, there's nothing like telling a man, I would rather you give me a job, Dr. Richards, than for me to ask you, Dr. Richards, give me some money to buy some food. And they say, okay, go give you $250 for 6 months. But after that, what happened to me? Give me a job. If you give me, and put people, there's a certain kind of pride that somebody has when they have a job. So they're not giving people, I mean, they're not doing anything to move the employment needle, but all they're doing is giving people these little baits. 250 here and something. When this budget booster finish, I bet you there'll be something else to replace it. And in the meantime, people are languishing, either underemployed or unemployed. I would like to know what the unemployment rate is in St. Kitts and Nevis.
And I was about to make the point that at the end of the 6 months, when this program comes to an end, what is the government going to say to persons after giving them $250 for the last 6 months? You're going to find the next program to come with?
Most definitely. You want us to bet on it now?
I will not. I will not. And I made the point during the budget debate that when it ends, what is going to happen, you have the further increase in terms of minimum wage. So businesses are going to pass that additional increase to consumers.
Look for it.
They will pass it to consumers. You have the fact that the fuel surcharge has been introduced. That cost is being passed to the consumers. And if any of these particular recommendations go into effect this year, whether it is all of us or some of us, we will be affected depending on what is done during the course of this year. And these are the things that the government needs to come to the people and speak to them about. You
think they will come to speak to the people about that, Dr. Richards?
I said they need to. I didn't say that they're going to.
That is not my expectation.
I didn't say they're going to. Because it's always about giving persons this feel-good kind of attitude. Now, I ain't saying anything about the development bank because the report and as it speaks to development bank doesn't sound good at all.
No.
Okay,
not
in
at
terms
all.
of the future of the development bank and where the development bank is heading, and one certainly would hope that it's not heading in that particular direction. The report notes that in terms of loans from the banks, you have had quite a bit of competition and there is an increased amount. Well, it says it's partly due to mortgages, but it also makes notes of the fact that persons have been borrowing, and the reason why persons are borrowing is because they don't have it. And so they are now resorting to borrowing from the different financial institutions in order to make ends meet. It's really not good, as I said.
Yeah, it's not a good picture.
Not a good report.
And I don't know if I guess this is the government's PR machinery at work, because I saw a flyer that came out saying, oh, it's not so bad after all, and there was a series of bulleted stuff that they extracted from. But you see, those of us who are trained to look at things with a balanced view, we would understand that in the nice language there also are cautions, and so we would take time, and I wish that our people would take more time, not just to rely on a political party or politicians to tell you what they think it is, but we say we have how much percent literacy? Nearly 99%. We must take time to read and understand these things, and clearly we have people like you and other people who can clarify what it is we don't understand, because this bulleted thing that was shared, that was circulated by the party afterwards, you would think that, oh, what a rosy report. Things are nice, there's no need to worry. But yes, there are nuggets of concerns that we really have to zero in on and be mindful of, just the same ones we highlighted. But Dr. Richards, we also wanted to look at some things that we have to do to strengthen resiliency, because this was part of our thesis for tonight. Yes. And I know we spent a lot of time, sharing the reality of the report. But you are still active in politics. You are still, you're our lone representative in Parliament for number 5, and so as the party in opposition, perhaps we would be the one who would have to think about some of the ideas of resiliency.
Certainly.
So I don't know if off the top of your mind anything comes to mind. I mean, I know that they were recommending economic diversification. What does that look like? There's a heavy emphasis on renewable energy, and I guess we are probably putting our eggs in the geothermal basket, right? We're probably literally banking on that. But I have been following it, but what I'm not hearing is, you know, how soon would it likely to be? It's 3 years, 5 years, and I don't think for now anybody can give any particular timeline where that is concerned. So in terms of economic diversification, where do we go from here? What do we do?
One of the things which I have pointed out is that the government continues to speak about economic diversification. However, what the government has failed to do thus far is to pinpoint the areas that we would want to diversify our economy. If you identify those particular areas, then what are the incentives that you're going to give it, whether it is to persons or to businesses, to diversify into those particular areas? I said, for example, that the Prime Minister keeps speaking about development bank, and it's unfortunate that the bank finds itself in the situation that it is now in. But apart from development bank, you have National Bank. The government is the major shareholder there. What incentives do you give to persons in terms of getting the necessary capital, the necessary resources, in order for the economic diversification to take place in those targeted areas? Do you give tax incentives to persons to go into those particular areas? Do you give concession loans at concessionary rates to persons to go into those particular areas? So we need to identify the areas for economic diversification. Are we going into the digital economy? Where are we going to diversify? We keep hearing about this 20 by 25 agenda for agriculture. It's now 2025, and I don't think we're anywhere close to this 25%. Additionally, when you look at economic diversification, it cannot be about agriculture, because agriculture again can also be very fickle. One natural disaster and you could wipe out basically most of your crops. But what are the areas, what are the new industries that we're targeting? Do we have an ambassador or somebody out there targeting?
Tabasco pepper program.
Do we have an ambassador out there targeting businesses already established, whether it is in the US, in Asia, wherever, to bring a branch of that particular business into St. Kitts and Nevis? What incentives are we offering them? We don't hear that aspect of it. And so if we're going to become resilient, that is one of the things that we need to do. Part of being resilient is building the sustainable island state. But the fact is that you have quite a number of old people who go overseas to study and they don't come back, the brain drain. You need to get some of these persons to come back to St. Kitts and Nevis. What incentives do you give these persons? Do you say to persons when they go to development bank, for example, to take a loan, that if you return, the interest rate is going to be this amount, as opposed to those who don't return, this is what your interest rate is going to be. Is so that you give them an incentive to come back. Do you identify 3-4 acres of land somewhere in the Federation, and you say to some of your people who have been out there for years and who have a particular skill set that the country can benefit from, as you strive to become more diversified and as you strive to become a sustainable island state, you can get land in this particular area. This is the price that you will be sold the land at, because you want persons to come back. What are the guarantees can you give to those persons? Apart from saying bringing your items duty free, I'm giving you land, but what else? Have that conversation with persons to see what else would attract them to come back.
But also, what appetite is there for folks in the diaspora to get opportunities to invest here? There was recently a conference, I think last year sometime, and I think that was one of the objectives of the conference.
Exactly.
Have we heard anything since that?
I haven't heard anything since that, but you're correct, and that is the thinking, and that is where the thinking must be. You have this particular skill set that we need. How do we get that particular skill set? You have scholarships being given to persons. What are the areas that we want persons to go out and study? And so you begin to target persons to go out and undertake studies in these particular areas. You accept that, okay, I don't have it now, but eventually I am building a core of persons who will come back with that particular skill set. Now I could pivot here into the fact that you have the United States saying to governments and to countries that in terms of persons from Cuba, a lot of the skilled persons that you have from Cuba, that you no longer can have those persons, otherwise we will put sanctions
on your visa.
On your visas. And that has become a real concern. The senior minister, the Right Honorable Dr. Denzel Douglas, would have raised it in Parliament at the last sitting, and he indicated that CARICOM, it was a meeting, I think the foreign ministers were actually meeting to discuss it. But we boast that, okay, we get the engineers, etc. from Cuba. But what are you doing in terms of ensuring that your own persons, your own people, are studying in these particular areas?
Yeah, but even conversation about smart hospital, how are you going to build it out in terms of your resources? Do we have all our people have been trained? Is there a plan contingent with the building of a smart hospital that would take into consideration all of the trained resources that we require? Or are we going to import people here again?
That, as far as I know, I recall when I was Minister of Education, we had approximately 54 teachers who graduated with their master's degree. And that was done with support provided by the government. We paid up to 50% of the cost.
I remember that program.
For the persons to undertake their studies. They didn't go overseas. Those classes were offered right at CFBC. And I remember within the Ministry of Education, we sat down with the gentleman from CDB and also from UE, and we had a discussion as to the particular areas that we want persons to focus for their master's degree. For example, counseling. We decided that was one of the fields. I think it was 3 fields. One was counseling. I think one was in terms of education leadership, because we also recognize that we were having an issue in terms of finding persons within the schools to lead the schools, so also not just the practical experience, but to also had in terms of the academic qualifications. And so that was one area. And I think the other area was something to do with reading. And these are the things that you need to do. Have that needs assessment.
Yes.
The IMF report, partially spoke to it. What are the needs of the private sector? And so whether it is in terms of your AVIC or your other training programs, you tailor those programs to meet the needs of the country so that you can have, one, persons from the country being able to take up these jobs, and 2, you increase productivity. So these are some of the things that we need to focus on, Lavon, in terms of building resiliency. Now, in terms of natural disasters, there are a number of other things. There is a number of other things that we need to do in terms of building resiliency. We hear that, for example, the new hospital is going to be both earthquake and hurricane resistance, and that is good. But it's not just the hospital that we need to concentrate on. We need to look at our schools. One of the issues that we have been facing is that a number of our schools are close to the coastline. And so today or tomorrow, you have a major earthquake, and you know what comes with that, tsunami. What happens to our schools? So these are some of the things that we need to begin to look at as a matter of a priority in terms of building resiliency. You know what I mean? Sometimes we hear about, oh, we're doing this and we're doing that. But sometimes those are not necessarily projects that we need to focus on The other thing I would want to say is that government also needs to look at in terms of what you are investing in and the returns on those particular investments, because it's not everything that you might decide to invest in you're going to get the type of return that you need. So all those things must become priorities in terms of building resiliency.
Yes. There was also a couple of mentions of the private sector growth, and I guess private sector growth would come from some degree of maybe concessions, tax break, and all of that. But in the same breath, there was also saying pump your brake on those a little bit. So it's I think that government and governance requires a lot of creativity these days. And I don't know, you have been in government, I don't know if there's any conversation with the private sector, because you have to bring people at the table at some point in time to talk to them and find out how it is we can help you. To me, government sometimes seem to be in a guessing game. Well, I think they need, I believe they may require, without talking to the requisite people. And so I don't know where the private sector is concerned, because to me, there seems to be a little bit of a holding back now. Things are so uncertain that most companies are telling you they have an employment freeze, or they're only hiring when people leave.
Necessary.
And so what is there for government to do to stimulate growth in the private sector? Because there was a time when, and especially in the 80s, when the private sector, when the government flourished, the private sector flourished as well, or maybe even vice versa. And so if
private sector is really the main
engine of growth, exactly. And so if the government's program doesn't allow for that growth in the private sector, no wonder you're seeing this sluggishness now, because
a government cannot tax itself. But if the private sector is growing, you get taxes, you get employment, etc. I smiled when you mentioned creativity, because my PhD was in the field of
and I've been asking you, I mean, I wish, Dr. Richards, I really wish that one day you would, I don't know, I'm not telling you to write a curriculum, but I would like to see at least at a high school level, maybe 3rd, 4th, 5th form, some change in our curriculum that would drive our students to along those same paths of creativity, because we can't go on at the same old thing anymore. It's not working.
We can't. If you read the literature, it would indicate to you that businesses are saying that one of the most sought after skills right now is that of creativity. Now, some persons may say, oh, I'm not creative. But creativity can be taught, because there are certain skills that you can develop within persons in terms of enabling them to become more creative. And we did some of those even during my courses. For example, we speak about brainstorming. And so you bring maybe the whole department, you have a particular issue within the department, and you bring that department to brainstorm. Now they say to you that there are some things, some factors which must be necessary in order for you to facilitate brainstorming. For example, we tend to judge the ideas coming from persons. The 3 of us are in here and we're doing brainstorming, and you come up with a particular idea and I stroke my teeth and say that can't work. All the ideas, you accept them. Because when you go back, you might be able to see, well, this I don't think it's a good idea, but when you begin to flesh it out, you might see how you could refashion it, reshape it. And so those are some of the things that they teach you in terms of helping persons to become more creative. Because some persons are going to sit back because as far as they're concerned, the other people in here, they're smarter than me, or y'all don't listen, so I'm not sharing my ideas. I'm wasting my time, that sort of thing. But creativity can actually be developed. And I'm certain that if you have a greater creativity, productivity is also going to increase, and you would have more solutions to many of the problems that we have. You also spoke to having more persons around the table, and you're speaking about citizen engagement. Now, I listened to part of the press conference today, and the Prime Minister was speaking about this whole thing to do with crime and national security, and how all of the different parties were brought to the table. And so you need that type of citizen engagement in order to bring a solution to the issue of crime. But it's not just crime alone. You need to have citizen engagement to bring meaningful solutions too. I am certain that a lot of the issues facing us as a country, if we bring all of the people together, engage the citizens of St. Kitts and Nevis, you would be surprised at some of the solutions that will come forward and help to catapult the Federation of St. Kitts and Nevis forward.
Well, that sounds like an exclamation mark. So, but Mr. Richards, you are right, and I know we had to kind of quickly run through some of the resiliency strategies that perhaps can be employed, but there's also there's always room for more engagement and for more discussion. But I think what we have done tonight is to really set the tone and give some degree of understanding at a very basic level that the IMF report is something that all of us should take interest in. And I really appreciated the way that you broke it down in granular fashion, so that all of us understand that we should really begin to get our guards up for any and every eventuality based on some of the language that was written in this report.
The diplomatic language.
Right, as you correctly said, the diplomatic language. So I'm going to give you a final 30 seconds to put a wrap on this discussion, so that, and even if you want to promise us that you'll come back.
I am always available to come back, Lavon. You simply just have to send me a message, and providing there's no conflict with my schedule, I am available. I am a member of the People's Action Movement. I'm a former leader of the People's Action Movement. I am the lone representative of the People's Action Movement. When I decided not to seek election as the leader of the party, I made it abundantly clear that Sean is still here, and Sean isn't going anywhere. So Sean is still here, and in whatever way I can help to shed light on the issues affecting the people of St. Kitts and Nevis, I am quite happy to do so. I indicated to you, for example, that interestingly, someone else had contacted me about a radio program on Tuesday afternoon to discuss the very same IMF report. Unfortunately or fortunately, that didn't come off.
Well, the people would have just gotten a double dose.
A double dose, and perhaps he would have given me the opportunity maybe to explain some things there, explain some things there, because to really delve into it within an hour isn't much time. What I would say to the people of St. Kitts and Nevis is we're in for some hard times based on the recommendations put forward by the IMF. I also want persons to note that the IMF specifically stated that by putting those recommendations in place, that there would be a 2.5% increase, I think, in revenue. So it means that if those things do not go in place, then things will become harder, tougher. And if things become harder, if things become tougher, it's some message, it's the government, it doesn't affect me, but it will affect you. Because, as I said, the government provides certain basic services and goods to the people of St. Kitts and Nevis. When the farmers can't get seed, they can't get their land plowed, because the government cannot afford to do so, you will be affected. When you go to the hospital and you can't get basic medication, it is because the government doesn't have the money to do so. When you send your children to school and the teachers begin to complain and send home the sponsor sheets, etc., because they now have to try to find the resources to purchase certain basic necessities for the schools, you will be affected. So I don't want anyone to think that, oh, well, this is just about the government. When you can't get your increment, when you call the police station and they tell you, well, I don't have any vehicle or no gas in the vehicle for me to come, it is because the government cannot afford it. To the businesses out there, we already saw what can happen in terms of your investments, whether it is treasury bills, etc., when you have to get a haircut. These are some of the practical ways in which you can be affected in terms of the mismanagement of the finances of the country by this administration. We hear that a museum was being built for some millions of dollars. Up until now, the museum cannot be opened, but the money is spent. And so that money could have been used to do other things. We see the ministers almost every week. It seems as though they even stop saying no when they travel. Almost every week, they're out of the country. That comes at a cost. And who is paying for it? The people, the taxpayers of this country. And as we look throughout government, we see the wastage. Many advisors. I've never seen so many advisors. And we don't see the benefits coming to the people because of these many advisors that we have. And so you wonder, what is the sense? What is the value? What is the return that the people of this country are getting in terms of having all of these advisors that the government has seen it fit to employ? We have the corruption taking place within government. When I was in Parliament, I said that a particular minister of government goes to the government station to have the vehicle filled with gasoline. You know how many persons have met me on the road since then and could tell me which minister of government it is? Because it is a fact. It is a fact. How can you justify getting a traveling allowance from the government every month and you're still using the government fuel to fill up your vehicle?
Unethical.
It is unethical. Something has to be wrong about it. And the more and more people you speak to within government, you hear of the many ills taking place within the government. There's a young man who said to me one day that there's a particular minister, any job you do within that particular ministry, the minister hands are put out in front of you. I want something out of it. And they say when the minister comes to you, the minister will come with a face as if you owe me something. The minister upset with you like, you done the job, where my share?
Wow.
These are the kind
That
of
is
reports
low.
that you are getting about the corruption which is taking place.
And which is driving us to the IMF.
Exactly. And some may not see anything wrong with it, but it comes at a cost to the country.
It does.
And as you said, these are the things which are driving us to the IMF and will make you and I have less money to spend to be able to do the things that we need to do. It is unfortunate, but the fortunate thing, as I said, and I end on this note, is this government is just about 2.5 years into its term. And so it's time for people to begin to agitate to get rid of them. Get rid of them. The same thing that they came to you with in 2022 is the same thing now. Get rid of them. They're like termites, mashing up the country, destroying the country. You begin to wonder why you can't get this and why you can't get that. It is because of the termites mashing up the country. And when you have termites, you have to get rid of the termites because termites eat down everything and they eat it down very quickly.
On that note, ladies and gentlemen, the 4th edition in season number 2 of Perspectives has come to an end. We thank you so much for viewing. We want to give you a heads up that there would be a pop-up meeting, I think on March 14th. I think the location would be probably somewhere in constituency number 1. That is the constituency of our current political leader. But of course, stay tuned to our Facebook pages and all of the other social media platforms that the party utilizes to get more information and more details of this and other activities. Remember, we are in the middle of our 60th, our diamond anniversary. And so there are a lot more activities that would be happening over the course of the coming weeks and months. So stay tuned for them, and we look forward to your increased support of all of these activities. We thank you so much for viewing, and we hope you can join us next week on another edition of Perspectives. Goodbye.
That God has blessed the world in peace and love and happiness, we will forever dwell. We ask for God's protection and guidance on our way. The People's Action Movement will strive from day to day. The People's Action Movement